Welcome to another episode of the Cheerful Sound Man podcast. It's a show for event professionals about the adventures of producing stellar events with a smile. Today, the topic is all about production gear and equipment, caring for it, maintaining it, repairing it, getting more life out of it, all those things. Eric and John share their thoughts about all of that. So before we dive in, remember to follow us on Instagram or Facebook at The Cheerful Sound Man. All right, let's dive in.
The actual appearance of the gear, we have different sets of equipment. So when we do fraternity gigs and woodsers and stuff, we're going to put our more rugged gear that'll survive beer spills and dirt and hay and all that stuff there. And then when we do weddings and stuff like that, we're going to put our nicer gear out there. So we have different sets of equipment that go out. The other thing, as far as maintenance, best thing to do is to keep a maintenance schedule, and quarterly should be checking the gear. That way you're not having problems at the event. You're figuring out problems before they happen. I mean, ideally, that's what should happen. It never actually happens. It's usually something will break at a show. But the way to prevent that is to set maintenance schedules and systematically check the gear. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I like the idea, the maintenance schedule, but then taking the opportunities when you do have downtime. So a lot of times in the events industry, we'll get a crazy March and April, and there's tons of weddings, and there's events around. We're in a college town, tons of college events, things like that. So then, taking advantage of the time in July when we're a little bit slower, people are taking vacations, things like that. In our office, our team members are taking vacations, are kind of rotating around, but our schedule is typically significantly lighter, so that's a great time to go through some of those things. I think also pulling things out of inventory and not continuing to send them out. I know that, and that can be hard, especially when you're smaller, because you don't necessarily have a bunch of spares and extras, but actually pulling it out of inventory, making sure you thoroughly clean it, test it, those type of things when you need to. The other aspect too is like different categories of equipment are a little different too. Like speakers, I mean, we've got speakers kicking from the 90s that are still freaking phenomenal speakers.
Yeah, they hold their value.
A bunch of that EAW stuff that was Everman's back in the day, still great speakers. The 650s, we use them on a barge show.
Yep.
A couple times a year. It's a big system out on a barge. People are floating all over the place. They have amazing long throw coverage. They're easy to deploy. They're like the best speaker for the job. And, they're still kicking around. They're 40 years old and they still sound freaking great.
Right.
We're not going to put that again on the wedding or something like that, but we have those sets of gear. Speakers are also easier because you just paint them black again. So.
In that same note, you're not going to use lights from the 90s.
Yes.
Different equipment. Lighting gets dated a lot quicker.
Video
gets,
video lasts like 2 years.
Exactly. So, speakers are something that you keep around, and the other stuff has to be kept up with.
Actually, funny enough, even with our, so a lot of our bigger purchases, we've done equipment leases on, where you lease to own it sort of deal. It's a little easier to finance for a company, those type of things. Like our PA system and LED walls in the past, things like that. And I always found it funny, the financing guys actually won't, with an LED wall, they'll only do a 2 or 3 year term typically, because they're like, we're not going to finance it past its, usable
expiration
life cycle.
point, right.
They're like, oh, everything's going to be 4K, whatever, in 2 years. So it's interesting because they treat it differently, whereas a sound system, or the stage, they'll let you do like 7-8 year leases if you want, because they know, you buy a line array. I mean, our JBL arrays are from the early 2000s, and you do have to maintain them. You have to refoam them. The speakers go here and there, but, overall, they're still rocking. They sound great.
They're still great.
We have not had a single complaint.
Yeah. We just had the Subtronics guys do the show at BMH with the 4888s or the 9s?
88s.
And they were saying that it's one of the better sounding rigs that they had heard on their tour with our old early 2000s Vertec rig,
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cheerful Sound Man podcast. If you enjoyed that, it'd be so great if you could just subscribe, leave a review on Apple or Spotify podcasts. Man, that would make our day. And don't forget to follow us over on Instagram at The Cheerful Soundman. Either way, thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you got a little something out of that. And we can't wait until we share the next episode, which will hopefully drop as soon as we can get it ready. So stay tuned. And until then, don't suck and don't be a jerk.